4. We look at fraud and corruption and arrest by the Hawks, which will be made on Thursday. Now, the head of the unit was briefing Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts together with the SIU and the NPA. Newzroom Afrika's Tim Tongana starts us off.
Another showdown is expected this week with an imminent COVID-19 fraud and corruption arrest due on Thursday. Hawks head General Godfrey Lebeya told Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts that they are dealing with an influx of cases and 80,000 illegal payments linked to COVID-19 corruption have been made. Lebeya says 13 cases have already been completed by the Hawks, while 6 other criminal cases, including a UIF one, is currently before the courts. It involves a company called CSG Resourcing, which allegedly submitted a UIF claim that subsequently went straight to a Capitec bank account instead of going to employees on its payroll. That case involves money laundering worth 5 million rands. The Hawks have also said 14 more cases will be on the court roll by January. They were joined by the SIU and the NPA in a parliamentary virtual briefing. The SIU head advocate Ndimo Tibi told the committee that they're investigating 67% of the 15.6 billion rand spent by government in the fight against the coronavirus. That's more than 10.5 billion rands linked to COVID-19 fraud and corruption. Matibi says there are several contracts worth 223 million rands that have already been referred to a special tribunal.
What we have done, firstly, was to seek to secure the amounts that were available so that when we do the civil recovery, we can have recourse to those amounts, of course, based on the evidence that we have uncovered that indicated wrongdoing onto the officials and to the accounts. And this part includes the accounts of the service providers involved. About 39 bank accounts were involved, and we also identified those officials who, as we always say to the Honourable Committee, that the phenomenon of officials resigning when faced with when confronted with irregularities that they might have committed, they resign. So what we are doing is to ensure that they don't really just get away. We have thought it appropriate that, again, so that when the matters are finalized and we are able to have recourse to them, we should have recourse to some of the assets that they have. In this instance, we would then request the special tribunal to freeze their pensions.
The SIU says several officials in Gauteng have resigned after being implicated in COVID-19 corruption. It asked Parliament to assist in drafting a framework that will stop these people from resigning. 930 COVID-19 contracts are so far being investigated by the SIU. Most of them involve PPE corruption, but Motibi says they will soon move to infrastructure-related fraud cases. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Tim Tongana in Cape Town.
Tim Tongana, thank you tonight. For more on that issue, let's speak now to the chairperson of Scope, Kulego Hlengwa, joining us on the line. Kulego, good evening, and thank you for joining us on the Newsfeed late night.
An absolute pleasure, Putabo. Good evening to you and the viewers.
Now, according to the SIU, of the 15.6 or so billion spent on the COVID-19 response, 10.5 billion, that amounts to 67% of that money, currently under investigation. And that tells you the extent and the scope of the corruption that has actually occurred. And quite interesting is that most of it seems to have happened at a provincial level. And there is some at national, of course, some at local government as well. What's the reaction from Scope?
Well, we're not surprised because we had warned that this would happen if National Treasury and government departments did not actually operate within the confines of the law and within the emergency spending protocols. And so we're not surprised. Of course, we are disappointed that we have a cohort of people in the state's machinery and, of course, so-called business people doing business with the state whose sole intention is to loot, particularly looking at the fact that we were spending in an already struggling economy. We were spending during a time of a health crisis where all of us had to put shoulder to the wheel to do the right thing, particularly around access to health care and social services, including but not limited to water services. So in our view, all of this combined, when people loot from the state, they are actually putting people at risk further to the, challenges of COVID-19 that we had. And that's why we are hard-pressed to actually ensure that the law enforcement agencies translate all these investigations and arrests into successful prosecutions and recoveries of finances and money to the state, because this is, for all intents and purposes, really corruption, which can be classified as a crime against humanity, given the fact that people's lives were further put at risk during a time of crisis.
Indeed. Looking at the steps, though, that are being taken, the Hawks announcing that more arrests will be made, at least by Thursday, the SIU saying they are fast-tracking certain cases and taking them to the tribunal. But not only that, pension funds of certain executives, particularly in the Gauteng legislature or Gauteng Department of Health, shall I say, have been frozen, or at least applying for them to be frozen. Do you think this is the right message and a step in the right direction?
Of course, we fundamentally believe that the law enforcement agencies are on the right track in terms of how they are actually dealing with all these matters, and they need our support, and they need parliamentary interventions to tighten up on some of the issues that they raise. A fundamental issue is also the bulletin or the insert by Achim Tongana was saying, is the issue around people resigning on the eve of disciplinary processes. And so we do really need to, as Parliament, deal with that and create a framework which will be consistent with the law. Amongst other things, to blacklist people if they resign, and then particularly seek employment within the state again. So to resign from Department X and then go to Department Y, that should not be allowed until you may resign, but the allegations still need to be tested within due process. We're looking at people being blacklisted not to do business with the state, because that is also another avenue that they're taking, resigning and then coming back as business people because they are familiar with the processes and people inside the state's machinery. And of course, the freezing of pensions, as the SIU is doing, is something that we're encouraging. And so this is a discussion we need to have with employment and labor, public administration and culture departments and the portfolio committees, really to say how do we move into a direction of entrenching a system within the law that will help. Just one example you would have seen in what the SIU was presenting today, that the CFO of Correctional Services Department has got allegations against him now, having that to the effect that he gave tenders to family members. But why I flag that particular one is that the person in question left the Municipal Demarcation Board under a cloud of corruption or allegations to that effect. And so this is a classic case as to why we need to test allegations in due process before you take employee elsewhere. And so this is something that the SIU will have to look at. So those are all the lessons that have emerged which require our urgent attention.
Mkhuleko Hlengwa, much appreciated, and thank you for your time speaking as the chairperson there of SCOPA today, following that briefing and documents presented to them by the SIU and that briefing by the Hawks as well as the NPA.